Hi, welcome everyone to UC Berkeley's Osher Lifelong Learning Institute's town hall meeting. Today, the title is After the Election, the World in Crisis. We're really delighted you could join us. I'm Susan Hoffman, the director of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. The town hall is something held 3 times a year at OLLI for 90 minutes, giving us a chance to bring you the best of Berkeley, the best in the field of the particular thematic and topics. We're really delighted with today's panelists. And as always, we have our very own Darren Zook, who will be moderating the discussion. We will begin with panelists speaking. We will be recording, and the chat will be open for questions that you have. Darren and myself will be reviewing those so that after each of the panelists have spoken, you will have a chance to hear them respond to your greatest concerns and thoughts. Thank you again for being here, and I will turn it over to Darren.
All right. Thank you, Susan. Good morning, everyone. We are here to bring nothing but happiness into your living rooms, or at least we're going to try. We're going to talk about things after the election. And if you want to know how bad things are or how unsettled things are, Bev Crawford's dog was just on screen before we joined. And I asked the dog how things are. The dog summed everything up in one word and just said, rough. But anyway, on a more serious note, I am today's moderator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep things moving as our four speakers. I will introduce the four speakers. The first half of today's program is going to be them presenting various viewpoints on things. If you have any questions or insights, please put them in the chat section of Zoom. I'll be monitoring that as the speakers are speaking, and I'll try to basically parse through the questions and try to organize them in a way, and then I can efficiently pitch them to the panelists in the second part of today's program. So it's an interactive town hall. That's why we call it a town hall. So feel free to do that. And without further ado, having said all of that, I am now going to introduce our first speaker. So our first speaker is Isaac Chotiner. He is a staff writer at The New Yorker, where he is the principal contributor to Q&A, a series of interviews with public figures in politics, media, books, business, technology, and more. Isaac, I will now yield the digital floor to you.
Thank you, Darren. I appreciate it. It's great to be here. I wanted to start talking a little bit about where we are now versus where we were in 2016 when Trump won and where we were in 2020 when he very barely lost. Trump came into office in 2016 with 2017, I should say, with extremely low approval ratings. He had still chunks of the Republican Party aligned against him. There were people in Congress, Republicans, who did not totally follow his agenda. And you saw the country at large, not just expressed in his low approval ratings, but just in the sense of almost every institution seemed to be putting up real resistance to him. Business leaders, companies, everyone was making clear, not everyone, but many people were making clear the ways in which they did not support the new administration, that they felt that he did not represent American values, and so on and so forth. And we saw during his administration him accomplish, I think, a lot of what he wanted to accomplish, including a giant tax cut and some other things. But we also saw pretty thorough resistance to his administration through those 4 years. His approval ratings never got back up above 45%. He lost the House of Representatives in 2018, and then he lost re-election to Joe Biden. It was very narrow in the Electoral College, but he lost by about 4.5 points nationally. And so I wanted to start by thinking about what would have happened if he'd won that election barely. Donald Trump would have been reelected in 2020. He would have just lost the popular vote. He would not have had control of Congress. And he was very unpopular. COVID was happening. People did not approve of his response. And if he'd managed to eke out re-election, I think we would have seen him kind of limp to the conclusion of his term. We saw, I think, how a lot of sort of cultural and business leaders felt about him after January 6th, when he was banned from a bunch of platforms and when he became a pariah, even for a very short time within the Republican Party. Obviously, none of that would have happened if he'd won, but I think you get a sense of how weak in many ways a political figure he was at that time. Donald Trump now comes into office in 2025, or has come into office in, I think, a really different situation. He won the popular vote in the election. He has a completely united Republican Party behind him. You see his administration being staffed not by many sort of typical Republican figures like we saw last time, the so-called adults in the room. And I think whatever anyone thought of that phrase and how those adults in the room actually behaved in his first term, I think there was a sense that these were people who did not always support his agenda fully and did not want to take the country in exactly the place that he wanted to take it. And I should say we're longtime figures. I'm thinking of, Jim Mattis or H.R. McMaster, a lot of people that you can think of who staffed the administration who were seen as at least serious figures who had some interest in governing or in foreign policy or something else. Now we see Trump coming into office with a completely different crowd of people. We see business support for him being unlike anything it was ever during his first term. We saw this most famously at his inauguration, his support in the tech community from people like Jeff Bezos, even people like Tim Cook at Apple. So it's just a completely different situation. The power he has over the Republican Party, the power that he has over his own administration, and just more broadly, his approval ratings are not, I would not call them high, but they're definitely higher than they were last time. And it just feels like we're in a very, very different place than we were even if he'd won 4 years ago. And I wanted to think about that because I think what we're going to see in these next 4 years, I'm concerned in many ways what we're going to see is Donald Trump behaving. I mean, his behavior, his day-to-day behavior is not going to change. He is who he is, but that we will see him in some way behaving, especially on the world stage, differently. Donald Trump had a reputation during his first term as someone who was not particularly interested in war, who wanted to keep America out of foreign conflicts. I don't know that this was ever entirely true. Things like drone strikes were increased a lot in his term versus how they were in the Obama administration, the second term of the Obama administration. But there was a sense that Trump was not that interested in the world and wanted to sort of build walls around America and focus on how things were at home. And I think that there was some truth to that, but I also think we may see a much more aggressive Trump administration on the world stage. We've seen this in comments like his comments about Greenland, about taking back the Panama Canal, about his bullying attitude to the Colombian government when they seemed reluctant to accept a plane load of refugees. And I think we may see this in Ukraine as he tries to perhaps bully the Zelensky administration into a deal that they do not want to make. There are a lot of different ways that this could go, but I think the fact that Trump has so little pushback against him means that we could see a very different 4 years in terms of foreign policy specifically, not to mention what we're already seeing on the domestic side. And so that's sort of where I thought I would start off, because I think that my fear is that the sort of untrammeled power that he has compared to last time will lead to a more aggressive nationalistic administration on the world stage.
All right. Thank you, Isaac, for your comments and overview of what we might expect from what people are calling Trump 2.0. Okay, then. So I am going to move things right along and introduce our next panelist. And our next panelist is Bev Crawford, and she is Berkeley Professor Emerita of Political Science and Political Economy, whose work centers on global conflicts and refugee crises, international political economy, and ethnic and religious conflicts. Bev, I will now yield the digital floor to you. And you are muted.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks, everyone, for being here. I want to just pick up right where Isaac left off and begin with what I see happening around me. That headline after headline is screaming at us, from one illegal act to another, from one act of cruelty to another, from a cooperative international system, a cooperative international economy, to a viciously competitive one. Blatant lies. A violent insurrection is now a day of love. Naked power grabs, the likes of which we haven't seen before. a president who once incited his followers to take back power by force and violence. And I think what we're seeing now that Isaac has sort of ushered in, but I'm going to push it farther, is wholesale regime change from top to bottom. Every shaken foreign leader, every outraged media piece, every shocked and puzzled face with each edict, each statement from above cries out, regime change. Regime change is a complete change of government, legal norms, values, institutions, ways of solving conflicts, ways of talking to each other. They're not isolated assaults on our current system, each one demanding its own court case. The way they're playing out now, they are building blocks of a new regime. And Trump is moving as fast as he possibly can to replace our system of law, of reasoned debate, of respect for the sovereignty of our neighbors, of diplomacy, with a regime of pretty naked power. I think the motto of this regime is the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. Or might makes right. Or the message that Trump sent on Truth Social to Colombia, FOFA, F around, find out. It's quite different from the language of diplomacy that we're used to. So in the few minutes I have here, I want to offer an interpretation of Trump's words and acts of this regime change since January 20th to describe and explain what to expect from regime change in just a couple of examples in areas. And maybe these are examples of how this regime change is going to affect the world. For Trump, the old familiar regime has enfeebled the United States. It's taken away our daring, our courage, our taste for aggression. Inside, we've become a country of weenies and immigrants. And outside, which is what I'll talk about, the old regime traps America in a web of international rules, organizations, and alliances that tie it down and sap our strength. Knowing this, Trump believes, our allies play us for a sucker, us being the new regime. In order to restore our power, then, the power that Trump feels is lost, Trump is moving to blunt a weapon that Marco Rubio mentioned in his Senate hearing when he said that the post-war global order is not just obsolete, it is a weapon being used against us. Trump is moving to blunt that weapon by sweeping away the world of entanglements and rules and laws, and he is moving to eviscerate international organizations that were built after 1945. He's replacing a world that we know with a world in which the strong can ignore existing borders, existing laws, treaties, even the Constitution, can treat other countries as artificial, and break up world trade. A world in which the small have no recourse to law, alliances, or fair trade expectations. This is the process of massive regime change. One symbol of this to me is renaming Denali back to Mount McKinley. And I think it's telling. President William McKinley also united and consolidated the Republican Party. That consolidation lasted for decades. He presided over the United States as an emerging global power in a world devoid of any laws, norms, rules, or entanglements. McKinley took the territories of Guam, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and the Philippines by force as Spain's power was ebbing away. It was McKinley who inspired Trump's calls to make America great again by expanding United States territory and thereby expanding its power with the proposed acquisition of Greenland, the annexation of Canada, and vows to take the Panama Canal. In his inaugural, Trump sketched an agenda for territorial expansion, much like McKinley did. And I believe it is not expansion to far-flung areas, and we can talk about this, but expanding his power in our immediate neighborhood and backing out of the role of global leadership. I believe what Trump wants to do is create a sphere of influence, much like Russia wishes to create. And it was McKinley's tariffs, Trump believes, which made our country very rich, building U.S. economic power by protecting American manufacturing from competitors. The weird and jaw-dropping part of this is that by any objective measure, United States greatness was never lost. It was never lost. Talk of loss is a lie and a myth. America has already achieved greatness under the current world order. It is the greatest power on earth. Michael, our panelist, has probably written a definitive study of U.S. power, and he has the facts to prove it. I would really encourage you to read his book, Unrivaled: Why America Will Remain the World's Sole Superpower. Giving you just a small taste right now, America still has 3 times China's wealth, 5 times its military capabilities. The U.S. military budget is 10 times greater than that of Russia, and Russia's economy is smaller than that of Texas. So how are we supposed to understand Trump's sense of a lost American greatness that demands a complete change of regime? I believe that what his words and actions actually mean is that he wants to restore his own greatness. And through the flurry of executive actions, he's messaging. These are just performative messages in many ways. He's messaging that he is strong, that he is great. In the inaugural speech, almost everything he mentioned was an executive action that he himself would take on. He talked little of laws that he wanted Congress to pass. And what interests Trump is what he can do alone. What he believes is that he is the mythic embodiment of the lost spirit of McKinley, and he will bring it back. His America First policy is a Trump First policy. So from this perspective, he's quite serious about Greenland. He has spoken of using military and economic force to acquire it. And under the norms and rules of the current global regime, Greenland is just part of Denmark, inhabited by people who are Danish citizens, who have a prime minister, and the prime minister can't sell Greenland any more than an American president can sell Florida. Under our current, and I will call it the old regime, we see it as a country whose global companies do billions of dollars worth of trade with the United States. And it's a loyal member of NATO, a founding member of NATO along with the United States, an alliance that's part of that regime. But for Trump, NATO is an entanglement, sapping American power. So if he wants to do away with the old regime, he is saying, I don't care if Denmark is an ally, I will take Greenland by force if necessary. In our current way of thinking, the Danes were very loyal to the United States, and they remain so now. I think it's a mark of loyalty that they sent troops to Iraq. 43 Danes died in Iraq. Our alliance was based on shared values and not merely transactional interests. The level of cooperation was quite different. Denmark helped the United States when asked or volunteered without even being asked. So acquiring Greenland and absorbing Canada and taking the Panama Canal will make America look great on a map and create a sphere of influence for the Trump regime And so his bid for Greenland is not shocking at all, even though it will not add to American greatness one bit. I would not be surprised if he doesn't do it in the course of his administration. What Trump said in his inaugural speech was telling, and what he left out is even more telling, I believe, because he said nothing about Europe, our largest and most important ally and trading partner. Trump is withdrawing American troops from Europe as we speak. He's threatening to disrupt trade with tariffs and possibly no longer sharing intelligence with the Europeans. Europe is not prepared for this new regime, and as of now, its military equipment is outdated, its forces are undersized, and if it had to go to war, say with Russia, the Europeans would have little ability to fight that war. And with Trump saying that if the Europeans don't raise their defense spending, he's saying to Russia, you know, what the hell? You can send them to hell as far as I'm concerned. So the Europeans are not prepared for this new regime. And I think they can't increase their defense spending as much as Trump wants, from 2% a year to 5% a year, without undoing their welfare states and angering their populations. So it's really unclear what's going to happen to Europe now. It's unclear what's going to happen in the world. And I would have more to say about Europe, about Musk, about his courting of the far right, about the move to the far right in Europe. But for now, I want to leave you with something slightly positive. And that is, in his inauguration speech, Trump said that he'll be partially judged in the wars that he does not begin, or that do not begin. The best possible thing that can happen with Donald Trump, in my view, is that it really embeds in his self-conception that he's a person who ends wars and through his own strength keeps wars from starting. Thank you.
All right, thank you both for that very extensive overview of the view from Europe. We're going to geographically shift now. I'm going to turn things over to our next panelist, who happens to be Harley Shaiken, who is Professor Emeritus of Geography and Education, focused on the intersection of global economic integration, labor, organization of work, and information technology. From 1998 to 2021, he was the director of UC Berkeley's Center for Latin American Studies. Harley, I will now turn the digital floor over to you.
Thank you. This, as we all know, is a very critical moment, and for many of us, a deeply depressing moment. I think it is an urgent time to look forward with a positive attitude, because there are things that can be done and things in a very real way that must be done. Let me start with an article that appeared on the front page of the New York Times on January 4th of this year, discussing the election. The headline is "How the Democrats Lost the Working Class." The theory seems sound: stabilize financial markets, support the poor, and promote a more secure, integrated world. But blue-collar workers were left behind. Those blue-collar workers and working class workers more generally in all kinds of service and other occupations had this sense that they weren't participants in the good things that might be happening, but very much ignored. That laid the basis for Trump connecting with people. Some observers saw this much earlier. Bill Clinton's Labor Secretary, Bob Reich, made some comments in 1994 after the North American Free Trade Agreement was passed. And the notion was that was met with genuine anger by American workers and by unionized workers in particular. And Reich was asked to address the centrist Democratic Leadership Council 2 weeks after Newt Gingrich became the Speaker of the House. And he said, today, the targets of that rage are immigrants and welfare mothers, and government officials and gays, and an ill-defined counterculture, Mr. Reich cautioned. But as the middle class continues to erode, who will be the targets tomorrow? We've seen that. This could be a description of what we're looking at today. I'd like to put this in the context of what this means in Latin America and what we are seeing the actions of the Trump administration doing before our very eyes today. I'd like to use two brief examples. First, Colombia, and second, Mexico. Both are critical allies to the US. Both have center-left governments today, but for Colombia, even with center-right or right governments, it has worked very closely with the US. So I think most of us are aware of the recent incident when the president of Colombia turned away 2 flights filled with people that the United States was deporting to Colombia. And this enraged Donald Trump, and he immediately declared a 25% tariff against Colombia to rise to 50% within a week unless Colombia agreed to accept these migrants. Colombia, the president immediately caved, and the tariffs were unwound, and it was a damaging defeat politically for him, but this was diffused. But we've got to put this in a little more context, because this was an incident that didn't have to happen. Colombia accepted 475 flights of people being deported from the US under the Biden administration over a 4-year period. And why this was so inflammatory is Trump sent the deportees in military aircraft, and for the president, who had been a political prisoner earlier in his life, this triggered a very negative response. So it blew up, and it showed a defeat for Colombia. But what it also has done is damaged the US standing in Latin America, not simply in Colombia, but throughout Latin America, with virtually all countries absent Argentina. And why that's important for the interests of the United States, and why this so-called Trump victory is in effect something that could create very damaging consequences a bit down the road. Damaging consequences? Yes. Colombia is one of the few countries where the US has a trade surplus. We're their largest trading partner. But throughout Latin America, the largest trading partner today in most countries is China. They are putting a considerable effort and funding into construction projects and into embedding themselves through their own exports and some imports in Latin America. The kind of behavior Trump exhibited in this so-called victory in Colombia damages the relationship with the countries of Latin America and results in them looking to China, which could come back to haunt the US in a longer term. The second example I'd like to look at briefly is Mexico, where Trump has said on Saturday he will have a 25% tariff on all goods coming from Mexico and from Canada, and just a few moments ago reaffirmed that the US will be doing that. Now, this would be very damaging to Mexico, but as damaging to key industries in the US that will be affected, particularly the automobile industry. So the economic consequences will play out here in very damaging ways. So going forward, it becomes really important to look at what are the possibilities to switch this kind of impulsive, reckless, threatening foreign policy. There's one thing that is really below the radar of most Americans today, which is the sharp decline in the membership and influence of what historically has been a vital part of our society since the 1930s, the mid-1930s, a labor movement with progressive ideas and with a focus on the impact of what takes place on working families, whether they're union members or not. A few days ago, the US Labor Department announced that we have reached an all-time low of union density, that is the percentage of workers that are in a union, where it's now fallen below 10%. In the private sector, it's fallen below 6%. That diminishes the ability of a voice for working people within the political arena. So the rebuilding of the labor movement, which Democrats have historically forgotten since Bob Reich's message just after the NAFTA debate and NAFTA's enactment in 1994, the rebuilding of that as a part of a progressive coalition that puts working families, that puts minority groups, that defends civil liberties more broadly back on the agenda politically, is a vital part of a recovery. And rebuilding the relationship and working with Latin America is critical to the countries of Latin America, but also to the United States in so many ways going forward. So we're not at the end of the road, we're at the beginning of really seeking to redefine politics. What works in our favor is historically, particularly in recent decades, the first midterm election after a president wins tends to reverse that in the Congress. With some control in the Congress, which is so narrowly split today and is easily imaginable within 2 years, a lot of things could change, and the agenda itself could become redefined. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much, Harley, for that expansive overview of not just Latin America, but what's going to happen right here, potentially in a couple of years with the midterm elections. We have one speaker left to go, and I will now introduce him. And then after that, I appreciate all your questions rolling into the chat. Please keep them coming in, because after our last speaker, we're going to turn things into a more interactive format. So let me introduce Michael Baker. Michael Baker is a retired surgeon who served in the military and retired as a rear admiral. Baker has visited Kiev, multiple times recently to teach advanced trauma life support to Ukrainian physicians. Michael, the virtual floor is now all yours.
Well, Darren, thank you for that great introduction. And Susan, thank you for inviting me on the panel. I'm not sure what I'm doing here with such scholarly people because I'm an amateur historian. I just kind of look at things, since I got retired, and sometimes I'll write a lecture or a talk and I'll go, this is what I think about what's going on. But as you mentioned, I had amazing experiences in uniform in addition to my professional career as a surgeon. And I was mostly operational, and I've been to Ukraine. I teach for the US military. I still do. It's been interesting. So one of the early courses, and I have to say, I give credit to Susan for getting me involved in the program. My very first course, she said, just write something about the military. I had no idea what I was doing or even how to give a good lecture, but I soon learned how to do a PowerPoint because, when you're in the Pentagon, you do a lot of those. And, it went on and on. But the last course I did about, 18 months, 2 years ago, was How America Became Great. Basically, I'm a very patriotic guy. And so How America Became Great was a fun lecture to write. I enjoyed it. It was 6 weeks long. And then I kind of got writer's block. I was having a look going to Ukraine and doing all this other stuff. And I had a little idea, a germ of an idea came to me because I was talking to a friend of mine about 10 years ago. We had seen a play at Berkeley Rep called It Can't Happen Here, which is a very interesting play to see. And I've since read the book. And then my writer's block kind of broke. But this is probably June. This is way before the election. And I started writing my impression of what's happening here with the culture wars and everything. Now I have a new talk I'm just completed, 6 weeks long. And basically the title that I picked, which may or may not fly, is What the F Happened Here. But I used 3 asterisks so you can put an H on there. And you can say, what the heck happened to my country rather than what the F happened to my country. But I started writing that because, I was seeing these terrible trends of culture war and all kinds of craziness and lies and disinformation. And then shock of shocks, the election. A vindictive and corrupt president gets into the White House. And as you can see, we're getting executive orders every day. I liken it to one of those tennis ball machines that keeps shooting them at you faster and faster. And, some of them are going to get passed because, he's just got an outline to follow and he's just going as fast as he can. A lot of people have been fired who we need to run the government. That included a lot of FAA people, National Transportation Safety Board, are fired 2 weeks ago. And guess what? We have a plane crash. Who's going to take care of, investigating that? I see big businesses falling in line, providing bribes. It's like 1936 in Germany under Hitler. So, I spend about 5 lectures looking at what happened. How the heck did we get here? I like the F word because it'll probably get me a bigger audience, but how the heck did we get here? And how did this happen? As we've heard our previous speakers, it's really multifactorial. And what I use my last 6th lecture as to give an opinion of what I think we might be able to do going forward. And I'll just give you a taste, which is you can be depressed in January and we can all mourn like crazy. It's the end of January. And that leaves us 23 months to the midterm elections. And if we don't get Congress back during the midterm elections by tilting the table in favor of the Democratic Party, we're in a heap of trouble. So I would say concentrating on local elections, on school boards, excuse me, on congressional elections, on state assembly, and not just here where obviously everybody's, in a pretty blue state, but, everywhere. So we're going to have to support people, maybe even in other states running for office. But we have 23 months. So the mourning is over. You get to mourn for a month. Now we have to do something. All right, Darren, back to you. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much, Michael, for those insights and for not dropping an F-bomb, but instead of an asterisk bomb. Yay, even better. Okay,
it is Berkeley, free speech, right?
It's yes. I'm sure had you actually articulated that word, I'm sure you would have found a good reception anyway. But The F triple asterisk probably works better for us. By the way, in case you think things are really horrible, I will say anybody watching on the screen, I am drinking from a flask, but it is water, so it hasn't gotten that bad yet. I use it as a water bottle, so don't think, should I be worried about him? Okay, so here's the part of the program where I will start going through the questions towards the end of the program. I know several of you have concerns about, well, then what can we do? That sense of feeling really powerless. And all of the panelists will have a chance to address that. I'll save that for a little closer to the end, maybe for final comments, starting around 20 minutes before the ending. Until then, what I want to do is I'm going to field some of these questions. I'm going to start with one that goes kind of back to Isaac's comments about this being Trump 2.0 and everything being a bit different. The questions we have here, there's two of them, are basically, did the Democrats really overlook the working class, or did they just fail to communicate effectively to the working class everything they were doing for them? And also, was the working class as concerned with woke cultural issues as they were with their economic circumstances? There's a couple other questions along that about the idea of, kind of what actually happened. So, Isaac, I'll give you first dibs on this question as to whether you think that, in terms of Trump 2.0, is this really about the strengths of Trump, or was it about a misplay by the Democrats in terms of how they lost the working class and other constituencies?
I think it was a combination of things. I mean, I think the main story was inflation, which we see taking down incumbent parties all over the world. Seems likely to take down incumbent parties in Germany and Canada in the next few months. And we've already seen that in the UK. Places as far afield as India have seen the ruling parties at least wounded by inflation. So I don't want to make the story too much about the Democrats and what they did wrong. Although I will say it does seem the central thing that they did wrong, much more than I would say leaving behind the working class, because I think you'd have to say, compared to other Democratic presidencies, the Obama years, the Clinton years, both of which were very successful, popular presidencies, the Biden administration seemed more focused on working class issues. Biden was the first president to visit a picket line, passed a giant stimulus bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, and so on and so forth. So I'm skeptical that is the reason that Democrats have lost the working class. It seems like the principal political mistake Democrats made was that the man in the White House insisted on running for re-election despite clearly not being able to run for re-election, let alone serve another 4 years. And I think that was a disaster for both his party and the country. So that's, I would say, the biggest political problem the Democrats had, much more than specific policies per se. Although I would agree the fact that he could not get a coherent sentence out did hurt their ability to message.
Thank you, Isaac. Before I move on to another question, I will ask the other panelists if they want to add anything to that. I'll just go right through them. Bev, would you like to add anything?
Not at this moment.
All right. How about Harley?
I would like to add something. I think it is a great question, and I think it raises a very valid point. And Isaac just addressed that as well. The first 2 years of the Biden administration were spectacular in terms of the gains for working people and for unions. But the way that was communicated was almost below the radar. Something like the Inflation Reduction Act. What in the world does that mean? But that translated into jobs, into construction, into addressing environmental issues and global warming. So that was a missed opportunity. I think it's not as important to refight the specifics of the campaign or what happened to Biden in the last months of the campaign as working forward, getting that messaging right, and really reminding people in the lead up to the midterms that what Biden did in the first 2 years is vital for the country going forward.
Thanks, Harley. Michael, any comments on that, or should?
I think both of our speakers who just made their points are right on. The messaging is critical. The vision, it's some of those things that the CHIPS Act and the Infrastructure Act, Democrats did a great thing, and a lot of it went to red states and to swing states. And what would happen is a Republican governor would show up at the opening of the bridge and take credit for it. So the messaging coming out of the White House, even though they were doing good deeds, they were not very good at taking credit for it. And they did not do a very good job, and I'm not an expert on this, at the social media stuff. I'm still getting uh, letters requesting donations in the snail mail. Who opens, somebody's snail mail letter asking for a donation? Those days are over, and they need to. I heard Jeff Jackson, the just elected to the Attorney General, North Carolina. What an impressive young man. And I hope his political career keeps ascending. He was talking about how important messaging is for this century and going forward, where you really need to know how to tailor the message and then how to put it out where a lot of people see it, because mailers are not going to do it.
Yes, good point, Michael. And a kind of a related question here that about 3 or 4 questions have rolled in about basically identity politics, which might not have been at the top of the list of things. I know in the list of what's the most important election issue, economy was number one, and things like transgender rights were not so important. And yet there seems to be this assumed mandate among the new administration that dismantling DEI is somehow a popular mandate. And I'm curious if to ask the panelists, for instance, if you think this I've heard a lot of talk of the pendulum theory that basically the Democrats went too far to the left, and so now everything is swinging back to the right. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on whether or not identity politics and DEI were harmful for Democrats, or if you want to keep the focus on the new administration as to whether or not you think where this kind of new dismantling of identity politics or reworking of it, whether you think that's going to continue without much opposition. And I'll start again in the order of our panelists. I'll return this question over to you, Isaac.
No, I mean, I don't have a strong sense of this. I don't think it was particularly crucial in the election any more or less than cultural issues always are. And Republicans, usually run on cultural resentments of these sorts, and Democrats often run on, respecting Roe v. Wade or so on, which was easier this time since Republican appointed justices had repealed it. But no, I don't. I don't have a sense that was a particularly deciding thing in the election. In terms of losing working class voters because of the Democrats being seen as left on cultural issues, I mean, that seems like it's been going on for decades and is continuing, and not just in America. I don't feel like it was particular to this election.
Okay. Thanks, Isaac. Bev, I know you mentioned Greenland and Denmark, and Denmark, many people don't realize, at least in terms of identity politics, and especially immigration and assimilation, has swung very far to the right, even with a left-leaning party in charge. So do you have any thoughts on how you think identity politics might play out in any of this?
In the world, I let me go back to the United States just for a second. Because, and I think what I would say is, in response to the first question, that what we're missing is kind of what Chris Hayes has called this, the attention. We're not getting the attention of people, and the Republicans got attention with DEI as a slap against the Democrats and made it into a much bigger thing than it was. And that is happening over and over again with a lot of issues. And remember, we've always had identity politics in the United States. Africans were enslaved based on their identity. People have been oppressed and hurt because of their identity. Jews have been hurt because of their identity. So I think the Republicans almost want to go back to the old way, just like I say we want to go back to McKinley's era, to not talk about it, but that means that we are undermining the cause of equality in the United States. I don't know about Denmark. The only thing I know about Denmark in terms of that, and you might know more, Darren, is that, you know, the Greenlanders have been quite oppressed by Denmark, and they have worked for a long time towards, many have worked for a long time towards independence from Denmark. I think Trump sees an opening there. And so it's the same thing. They're oppressed based on their identity and where they live. And so they're impoverished. And some have suggested that Trump's oligarchs can give everybody $1 million in Denmark. There's only 56,000 in Greenland, only 56,000 people. So I think it's playing out everywhere, and it's not called DEI, but it is this kind of retreat from the concept of equality is rampant.
All right. Thanks for that, Bev. Personal anecdote here. I was actually interviewing the Minister of Defense for the Greenlandic government in Nuuk the first time the news broke that Trump was going to buy Denmark, and he asked me if I could explain it. And I was like, I didn't even know that was a thing. So nice coincidence there. Harley, would you like to say anything about identity politics?
Sure. Very briefly, I think it was an important factor in the election. And I think it was important because it was manipulated in a way that emphasized the exclusion of many working class voters who were white, some who were Latino, some who were African American. All were made to feel that someone else was getting the attention, that someone else was getting the benefit of government programs. So in New York, it became, undocumented immigrants bust up from Texas are being put up in hotel rooms. I'm having a hard time making my rent this month. They're getting free hotel rooms. That kind of manipulation was devastating, gets repeated ever more incorrectly, and influences things. It can be combated, but it has to be combated to be effective.
Yes, good point, Harley. Michael, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I like what Harley just said. I think it's important to not let the lies overcome the truth, and we have to keep stepping out there and putting the truth out and not letting the lies get to the forefront. The second thing is DEI, not a big issue in the election, but an important one for a lot of people, like you pointed out. And I have to just say something about that. When I put on the uniform of my country, I joined an organization that was incredibly integrated with a lot of people who were from all over the world, many of whom are serving in the U.S. military in order to expedite their citizenship. And that melting pot was not only very inspiring amongst itself because I met so many other people, but as I got to be a more senior officer, I was conducting citizenship ceremonies. And I can't tell you how inspiring it is to do a citizenship ceremony from people wearing the uniform, serving the U.S., coming from 8 or 10 different countries, and they want to be part of this. And then we're not welcoming them. So, for me, this is a huge human tragedy, not only for, our government, our culture, our society, but for our military. And as they start kicking people out, and I hear they are making, resignations, people resign, it's kind of breaking my heart. It's especially if it's based on DEI or on gender or whatever. We need better tools to do that kind of stuff. But I loved doing citizenship ceremonies. It's one of the best things I ever got to do.
Amazing, Michael. Thank you for sharing that personal anecdote as well. I'm going to turn the attention a little bit. We've got a couple of questions, not quite about identity politics. There's a note here, for instance, that says, I'm in my 60s. A significant percentage of young people in my life are super turned off by the focus on fundraising. And I can say from my perspective, talking with my undergraduate students, they really feel not like the Democrats abandoned them, but like government is unresponsive and unconcerned about them. And again, I'm going to go back through the panelists in the order they presented and ask a question about, the perspective, either your perspective of younger voters or sharing with you this, the perspectives I hear from younger voters that with Trump 2.0, you move from, like on Berkeley's campus and Trump 1.0, Windows had, hashtag resistance, hashtag resist. There were things that were happening on campus all the time. There were protests. Now it seems to be hashtag resignation. It is what it is. I can't tell the difference between the Republicans and the Democrats anymore. They're both non-responsive. So I'm curious. I'm going to use this as an opening for the next set of questions, which will finally be about what we can do. But do you think there's a sense of resignation more than despair, especially among younger voters here? And Isaac, I'll start with you.
I'm not actually sure I have a great sense of that as someone not on a campus and don't have too many conversations with younger voters. But I don't know. I feel like we hear about younger voters despairing every election, maybe not 2008. So I'm not totally sure what's different this time. I know, there was a lot of anger about the war in Gaza and college campuses, so it seemed like that was angering people, but I imagine that was also a relatively small percentage of students. So I don't have a great sense.
Okay. Just want to say, and any Bev, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, did you want to say something first, or?
I'm good to go. So I'm just going to
go. Yeah, I think that for younger voters, well, first of all, we have a winner-take-all system. So because Trump won, that's where I think really won, and nobody contested that. I think that's where part of the resignation comes in. But in fact, he only won by 1.5%. And I have seen studies now that show that voter suppression was very active in this election. Vote in various states, over 3 million votes were turned back.
That's just not true. I'm sorry. 3 million votes were not turned back in any state.
No, not in each state, but in across the country.
Okay. Well,
so I'm wondering though about younger people. Partly there's this whole emphasis now on masculinity, and Trump won a significant portion of the young male vote, and people like Mark Zuckerberg have said, well, we've become too feminine. I think it's part of this, turn away from equality. And I'm not sure what younger students on campus are saying about this, but overall, and the voters have sort of tilted towards young men wanting to have a more masculine, robust politic, and that is in the new regime. That's what Trump wants, and that's what he's offered people: strength, power, and I think more masculine leadership.
Yeah, you may be right, and I'll come back to that point in just a second. But first, I want to give Harley a chance to see if he has any thoughts on this.
Sure. I think what we've got to also look at is where we're going. Trump won the election. He's the president. Can he deliver? And I think given the programs and the approaches he's using domestically as well as internationally, I think the chances of him delivering on the core promises that many people think he made is very slim. And seizing on that is critical. That's one response I wanted to put out. And then the second one is it's not simply young people right now. I think young people remain idealistic. They remain engaged. It is tech titans and people in the business community this time around who have really, to defend their own interests, embraced Trump in new ways. And that is, I think, damaging to their own interests, but really changes the dynamic when Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, several others are on the platform behind the president and in front of his cabinet selectees. That gives you a sense of a new reality. Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller, whatever their flaws, weren't visibly running the governments of their time. And this broke new ground. You can see the motivations for them doing it, but it's damaging politically, and I think has to be pointed out.
Thanks for that, Harley. I'm kind of amused by the new word that's floating around, which is tech bros plus oligarchs equals broligarchs. So that's always fun. Michael, any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, I love Harley's characterization of who was on the dais at the inauguration. Not only were there a lot of oligarchs, you had Eric Adams going down to Mar-a-Lago to kiss, I guess I should say the ring here on video. I don't know what he kissed, but he was there too. A Democrat, right? He goes down there because he's going to trade something so that Trump gets rid of his investigations and his potential convictions. This is a very corrupt group of people. But back to who supports it about young people. So I currently have 4 people under 30 in my house. I have a couple bounce backs with their girlfriends, which actually is really kind of nice. I'm enjoying it. We are on different planets when it comes to what we watch and what we read and who we talk to. The music drives me crazy. I'm listening to classical. They're listening to rock and anime and stuff. It's different, but I try to cross that divide where I can. So we're talking to each other. And I also have a kid in college. We talk about this stuff to some extent. And when I try to inspire them about the future, I keep reminding them that this is their planet and their country to lose, and that issues like future of climate change, we haven't seen much of that with wildfires in California lately or anything similar. And, I keep reminding them that, if you want to mitigate climate change and you want to make sure that, air traffic control is safe, or you want to make sure the roads and bridges are built, you need to think about who you're supporting when you vote. And, they're kind of starting to get that message as these edicts come out from Washington, freezing all federal funds going to everything from Meals on Wheels to, college scholarships and you name it. I mean, when I read the list of what could have been frozen, that includes the VA. And that would have harmed a lot of people. So when I meet my vet friends, I try to remind them, that Trump almost stuck a knife into their economic stability. But they don't quite get it because it's almost like a religious cult. So I think it's better to really concentrate on the young people, millions of whom stayed away from this election. And you got to remind them that this is their country and their planet, and they got to get engaged and they got to pay attention. I have to admit, when I was their age, I didn't pay attention. I was busy building my career. But boy, I'm reminding them that it could all be lost. So they got to get engaged.
Darren, if I could just comment on what Michael said.
Sure, go right ahead, Harley.
I think it was an absolutely essential remark and framed very eloquently what our challenge is. And just you talking about climate change, this is a cosmic challenge, and we're not talking about it by and large in this conversation. We're so focused on Trump. So Los Angeles burns directly attributable to climate change, and we're looking at this in a way that's distracted. We've got to put climate change back on the agenda, and we can't forget that the clock, the doomsday clock, is now at 57 seconds to midnight in terms of nuclear risk. All those things can't be put to the side, and we need to inspire young people, in part because they're inspiring us. And bringing both those things together, I think, has possibilities.
Yes, thank you for that insight. I should say I'm actually teaching a class this semester that is designed to do exactly all of this. Get our undergraduate students deeply engaged in the process. What their political leanings are is up to them, but it's like as long as they stay engaged, I think there's hope. And speaking of that, I do want to leave plenty of time for this because a lot of the questions rolling in, well over half of them, are kind of this: what do we do? And I think part of that is driven from in Trump 1.0, there was an idea that, take to the streets, shut things down. And that, in hindsight, it might have been cathartic, but it didn't seem to work. And I don't want to, start from the point of view that says, I'm not asking what can we do to, quote, resist Trump. That's not the question, although you can take it in that direction. The question is, we have the situation we're in right now. And a lot of people are saying, what should I do? How can I get involved? What plan of action might there be? And I would like to let all the panelists, really have some insights on this. One question was basically, should we, moving out of the country, pros and cons? And I'll just say this. If you're planning on moving out of the country, do your research first. I don't know if you saw actress Sharon Stone said, I'm leaving the country and I'm going to Italy. And I was like, you might want to see who the leader of Italy is before you arrive, because Giorgia Meloni is not what you'd call a progressive leftist. So do some research before you arrive in your country of choice. But, any thoughts on, for instance, what can keep the democratic process alive? And make sure we don't fall into a kind of a downward spiral of democratic backsliding. And once again, I'll just go through the panelists in the order they presented. So Isaac, I'll give you first dibs on this question.
So about what people can do, individuals can do, or about how the system can resist Trump? What were you more interested in?
Either one would be fine, but I think there's a concern that of what's called democratic backsliding. That either you can if you want to talk institutionally about what's going to happen within government versus what can citizens do to make sure that basically the democratic system holds, that our engagement with it strengthen it. Either way you address that, whether it's from what's going to play out in government with the whittling, the thinning of the civil service and things like that, is that something we should all be concerned about? There's quite a few questions about that. Or if you want to talk about citizen engagement, either way, it would be very useful and helpful, I think, for the people in the audience today.
Yeah, I don't have great thoughts on citizen engagement, but yeah, no, I'm obviously concerned about hollowing out of the government. And I would just say that I hope that these things are going to be challenged in court, the things that are illegal. Seems like there have been some illegal firing so far, perhaps this executive order that Trump signed on TikTok, other things that I think are going to be challenged in court. And I hope that the law is upheld. I don't have a great sense in terms of how to sort of fight against this, other than, I do think that the sort of typical things that people do, calling your congressperson or giving money to candidates you think are going to, defend the democratic process or whatever else. But, I think to some degree, the last time around, Trump wasn't able to steal the election because he faced resistance, and there would have been outrage if, Congress had voted him stolen election. And so I think that those same habits are good. It seems like they've gone a little bit dormant, but I don't have really any new theories for how to oppose him.
Okay, thank you, Isaac. Bev, any thoughts on what to do?
I think what's already been mentioned and what we've already been doing, calling our congressperson, being involved, working to elect people that are honest and who tell the truth is a big deal. But one thing that I think is really important is how to grab attention, because I think that and I don't want to go back into like what the Democrats do wrong, but just as an example, Biden didn't come out and speak very much. Trump was out there all the time, even when he wasn't the president for 4 years. And Trump grabbed people's attention. And you can look at the algorithms grabbing people's attention. This is hugely, hugely important. I think it's an attention thing that, people are concerned about transgender and DEI. I'm not sure they're really that concerned. I think it's been pushed. Our attention's been placed on it. People's attention has been placed on it. I think, like Isaac said, these culture war things, they grab attention. And that's why Trump is, using the F-bomb with regard to Colombia. It grabs attention. It grabbed my attention. And I think that we have to think about how we're ruining our kind of human bodies by hunching over our phones several hours a day and scrolling, and that we have to have more face-to-face communication. We need to meet with our neighbors, and we need to meet with our friends, and we need to meet with people we don't even agree with. And we need to get their attention, and we can do that by a kind of personal interaction, I think.
Okay, thank you, Bevan. And some of the points you make, there's some questions about media, so I might get to that and after we finish this round and talk about things like media, social media, and other things. But let's keep it on the point of, what should we be doing? And I'll let Harley have a word on this if you have something to say. Harley?
I think the suggestions so far have been excellent, but we've got an opportunity here. Whatever you're interested in, get involved in it and build it. What do I mean by that? The Sierra Club. Join the Sierra Club if you've got to focus on the environment immediately. The ACLU, one of the questions that came in, mentioned that. Absolutely. The ACLU has been playing a vital role on many of these issues, getting involved in a local campaign, volunteering for aid in Los Angeles. There's endless things, what we call or called civil society, just building that. And of course, becoming involved in the lead up to the midterm elections and other elections. Change is possible. We have the extraordinary privilege of not being actively suppressed from going out into the streets, into becoming involved in all kinds of ways. Even something on campus, a speaker is coming on an issue that you think is important, attend that on campus. To be at a place like Berkeley should open us in so many ways, and all of that opening and challenging the kind of lies that are defining the political discourse right now, which are unprecedented and increasingly outrageous. Just doing that, to be at a university, you're in place to do all kinds of things that are important to you, but that impact the political climate.
Thank you, Harley. I will let Michael have a word here if he wants to add anything. Michael?
It's hard being the last guy because everybody already said such erudite things that kind of stole my thunder. But to round it up a little bit, probably, we're a little old for national service, but as Harley points out, volunteerism is very, very, very important with whatever group you want to volunteer with. Donating, I have a little heartburn about donating. I try to pick and choose the groups very carefully, whether they're social, like the ACLU or SPLC, which I do support, or political candidates. I donate $100 or $1,000, and Elon Musk donates 100 million. It kind of makes you feel, like you're impotent. But, I think we got to do what we got to do with the tools that we have in our hands. And then last but not least, I assume everybody on the panel may have kids, grandkids, nephews, nieces, whatever. I try to gently engage them where they, in the I don't know what to call it, in the solar system where they live, which is not the same one sometimes that I am, where I read books and listen to classical music. But I ask them what they're interested in, what they're doing, what do they think about, the effects on climate change, and, do they have any interest in getting involved in, voting rights, things like that. So, I try to engage that younger generation, but on their terms. I have them explain TikTok to me. Now, TikTok might convert into Red Sky. I didn't even know what TikTok was. Now I got to learn a whole new thing. So, I try to engage that younger generation where I can and pull them along with me.
All right. Thank you for that, Michael. And I do want to add here, those of you that take classes with me online know that I like to sign off by saying, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. So don't overlook the power of self-care. You do have to take care of yourselves. You can, if you just worry too much about everything, you can really fall into the trap of what's called compassion fatigue and exhaust yourself emotionally to the point where you just, you kind of lose the spirit. So it's okay to break away from the news cycle and, do something crazy, like read a good novel that doesn't have anything to do with politics. Don't forget the need to, rejuvenate the spirit. Let's go through another round of questions here because it relates to what everyone just talked about, and that is we've got some concerns about kind of social media and media in general, which is, Michael, you mentioned that TikTok might become Xiaohongshu, the Little Red Book, which I think is such an amusing name for a Chinese social media platform. I'll share this with you. If you don't know this, on social media, one of the things that was certainly trending, and my students told me about this, is the idea that voting for Trump was cool because Trump was counterculture. So social media is a whole interesting world that I'm not saying get involved with it, but you should at least be informed about it. One of the questions was, it looks like we're moving in this direction that, how Trump is so outrageous. Should Democrats become even more outrageous? What's the right way to go? And is that really the influence of social media culture where the desperation to go viral means getting more and more outrageous? What is this doing to the quality of information? And more importantly, our ability to consume information in a way that's well informed and also responsible. And just to shake things up rather than go, as Michael said, in the same order, where I always leave him last, and he's like, I agree with everyone else. Maybe I'll come back to Michael or start with Michael and let you go first this time and end with Isaac. So, Michael, now you get to go first. Do you have any thoughts on the media, if social media or just standard media, and whether or not it could be done better?
I put myself on the spot, and now I don't have time to listen to everybody else and get their thoughts. But, again, I think Little Red Book, TikTok, it's a different world, and we need to get into it. And like I said, getting these letters that I get from Chuck Schumer in the mail, I mean, I just they go right straight in the trash because I have no interest in that. The Democrats and everybody else resisting what's going on needs to fine-tune their message. They need to get it in the appropriate places. They also need to get it, I heard Jeff Jackson this morning talking about his TV ads on Judge Judy. Probably most of us here don't watch that show, but he said it was absolutely critical to his election with getting the swing voters moving. So you have to target, if here in this part of, a very blue state, there's no point to putting a lot of money into certain things, but we could take that money and put it into swing states and do the things that we need to do. And like I said, I would have never believed about getting, political commercials on Judge Judy and other shows like that. But it sounds like it's absolutely critical in swing states. It's going to be, we got a lot of things to change. And in my lifetime, we're not going to fix the Electoral College. That's one of those things I would like to see us change. We can't even go there today. We're too busy with all this other stuff. But again, I think the main thing here is the time for mourning and depression is over at midnight tonight, the end of the month. You want to start February 1 with thinking about what can I do to serve my community, to donate to a political cause, to, talk to my kids and grandkids. And I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Michael. Next, I'll go again in reverse order. Harley, do you have any thoughts on, now that the election is over, what you'd like to see the media do or not do?
Well, it's for me, it's a handicap to go after Michael because he's very articulate. So, but I think we can look elsewhere in the world for examples. And the thing that immediately comes to mind, 3.5 years ago, students got together and decided to run a former student leader for president of Chile. And to the amazement of everyone, he won the presidency. It's been a rough 3.5 years. The next election for president in Chile is in October, but he is now leaving on a high note because he just was instrumental in passing a reform for pensions in Chile that makes a huge difference to ordinary working people throughout the country and is accepted by the financial community. His name is Gabriel Boric. Just looking at that example shows this can be done. Chile is not a huge country, but there's 20 million people. So to look at examples elsewhere in the world and to see how they may relate to what we're doing here opens up a lot of possibilities.
Agreed. And I was very inspired even by the student protests themselves in Chile. With I love how they were the penguins, los pingüinos. And as you're talking, somebody a comment rolled in that says legacy media is most disappointing, no courage. So I will use that as a setup to turn to Bev to see if you have any thoughts on what you would like to see the media or social media do better or not do at all.
It's such a hard question, Darren. I'm not in charge of the media. If the media were really TV, we could turn off our channel, or we can go to the channels that we like. We have a lot more choice but I love social media. I have to say, I'm on TikTok. I'm on every one of those social medias, and I communicate with lots of people around the world on social media. I think it's a wonderful thing, and I think we should get on social media, because why not? Doesn't the new regime expect us to all just kind of be silent, not communicate with each other? And in some ways, social media allows us to communicate with each other, comment on each other's posts and this and that. So I think we should get on social media, and we should speak on social media. It's a huge audience. It's millions and millions of people. And why not get on social media? Just let me say one thing from the last thing, and based on something that Harley said and Michael said, that running for office is something we haven't mentioned. But it reminded me that we can run for office, and young people can run for office. Berkeley has a young mayor who I never even heard of before, and it sort of shows the repudiation of the old guard. I myself, accidentally, I must say, ran for school board, and I'm on a school board, and so I have some oversight over education. It's crucial to do things like that, and it's a lot of work, but I think that's what we have to do, and I think we have to go on social media, and we have to speak on social media.
All right, thanks, Bev. And I guess perhaps no other panelist outside of Isaac. At least Isaac, your career is in journalism, so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on, what is the media getting right? What is it getting wrong? What should it be doing in terms of well, kind of anything we're talking about today? Any thoughts on that? Well, you're muted.
Well, it's hard to answer the question about the media broadly, which, concerns everything from Fox News to the New York Times to, Joe Rogan. But I guess I would just say that, the concerns I have about the media are more structural: the decline of local news, the unwillingness, the inability to raise money in advertising. And so the sort of turn to a subscription model, which has been really great for some places, but it's been much harder for others. So I have a lot of sort of structural concerns that media is not strong enough to have the role that it does, good media, especially at the local and state level. So that, I think, is my biggest concern over the next few years.
All right. Thanks very much for all of that. We are getting toward the end of today's program. I will say, Bev, I do appreciate your insights about we should all be on social media. But at the same time, don't forget social media is also run by the broligarchs. So what are we supposed to do? Anyway, just food for thought there. And somebody asked about Facebook. What else should I be on? That's a whole separate panel. Just understand that younger voters aren't on Facebook anymore, and they've moved on to other platforms. So we got about 5 minutes left. If I could, let's see. Let me turn over to Susan here to see if we should, if she has any thoughts on wrapping things up here. Susan?
Yeah, Darren, thank you. I do. I want to thank you, Darren, for your moderation of the town hall, and obviously to our wonderful speakers. Michael, Harley, Isaac, Bev, thank you for bringing such incredible passion and intellect into how we can understand the nervous causing situation that we're all in. This town hall meeting is very similar to one that we had in November that was a few days after the election. For those of you who are attending for the first time, please go to the Ollie YouTube site and see that November town hall meeting. Arlie Hochschild, who is mentioned in your comments here, was one of our speakers, and I think very helpful in us understanding the loss that we experienced in the election. There was also a really excellent presentation by Bill Sokol to exactly, Harley, your point about the blue collar worker and what has happened, not only just in recent years, but in decades. The next town hall meeting will be in April. I will be looking at all of the comments that you have put in there. Members, thank you for doing that. Thank you for participating, both with being here and listening, but also with those comments. We will use that for what is then the next town hall meeting. We know that the energy is really on the paths of resistance, how to respond, how to be proactive, and the like. I also want to draw your attention back to the Ollie website because we have amazing conversations scheduled. Next Friday, biologist Bree Rosenblum will be here to talk about the lessons from biology. Her talk is From Constraints to Creativity, Understanding Resilience in Our Planet and in Our Lives, looking at what we might call biomimicry of the natural world around the issue of resilience. And then following her on the following Friday is our own energy scientist, Dan Kamen, who is going to Johns Hopkins, where Bloomberg has put $6 billion into a center for renewable energy. Dan will be talking about the science and policy of energy and climate justice. So we will continue to also focus on climate change. There is a vital aging conversation about moving to a foreign country for those who are considering that option as well. I can't thank you all enough. But let me thank you again for being here, for being a part of what I think is a most remarkable learning community, and just full of insight and frankly, optimism. So thank you for that. And have a great weekend. Stay warm and dry. And Isaac, you stay warm in New York City. I know you're expecting snow. Okay, goodbye, everybody.